Hi, it's Katie with Be Your Own Champion, and today's video is about boundaries. There's a lot of talk about this online and just amongst people, and there seems to be kind of an unclear idea of what boundaries are and what healthy boundaries are and how to maintain them. I have done a video on this before, I think, but I decided to do a more in-depth one that covers a little more area to be more comprehensive. So what is a boundary even? A boundary is a limit or an edge between you and another person. They are rules and principles by which you live of things that you will and won't allow. Emotional boundaries distinguish separating your emotions and your responsibility for your emotions and another person's emotions and the responsibility for their emotions. Healthy boundaries protect you from feeling guilt over someone else's negative feelings or problems. They also help you not take other people's comments personally. And this is something that I hadn't really thought about the connection to before, but this is very true. Because of that healthy separation, you are realizing that their reactions and their behavior has nothing to do with you. Therefore, you don't take it personally. Another thing I hadn't realized until recently when I was doing some research on this is that healthy boundaries actually prevent you from blaming other people or criticizing them. Because when you are taking on the right to do that to someone else, it's an invasion of their life and is not healthy. Also, having healthy boundaries prevents you from taking on blame for something that it's not appropriate for you to take blame for. Now, here's something I can relate to, and this was a hard one to swallow when I realized how much it applied to me, but highly emotional reactivity suggests weak boundaries. And this is because we are having trouble trusting our own selves to maintain a healthy boundary for ourselves, or we don't have a clear sense of what we deserve as a human being, or we don't have a strong enough self-esteem. The thing about healthy emotional boundaries between you and other people is that it requires you to have a healthy internal set of boundaries with yourself. And many of us have never learned how to do that. No one has showed us how to do that. It is definitely not something that is like commonly practiced in society. People are constantly stepping all over each other's boundaries, and nobody knows how to draw them, and nobody knows where to draw the line and what's appropriate and what's not. Let's first talk about how boundaries are formed. As you may have guessed, boundaries are formed long ago when we were children. Many times, if we don't have a good, healthy sense of boundaries for ourselves or other people's boundaries, it's because we didn't have those as a child. They weren't properly modeled for us as children by our role models. The way you view boundaries can also be affected by whether you've had emotional or physical abuse in your childhood. Also, another contributing factor, which I hadn't realized until recently, is neglect. If you had a severe level of neglect in your childhood, this can affect your sense of what healthy boundaries are. So why do we even need boundaries? Like, what is the big deal, right? Well, boundaries create a sense of protection and safety. They create a sense of order. They help us define ourselves clearly. In doing so, we have a certain sense of confidence that we carry with us that is incorporated into all of our decisions. And more importantly, we have a clearer sense of ourselves in relation to other people, in knowing what is appropriate and not appropriate as far as how other people treat us. So in short, boundaries empower us to feel confident about ourselves and how we're moving through our lives. Setting clear personal boundaries is a must-have for a healthy relationship in order to establish mutual trust, mutual respect, and a caring and loving environment for the relationship to thrive. Okay, so all that's good and well, right? But how do you know if you even need stronger boundaries? Like, where is the line? There are a lot of question marks around this. Here are some clues to help you determine that. You may have issues with boundaries if you find yourself feeling powerless, angry, or defensive around a person. You have difficulty saying no. You change your mind on something you feel strongly about when pressure is applied. You find yourself really emotionally affected by individuals who are pushy, demanding, controlling, needy, abusive, invasive, argumentative, pleading, or even smothering you with kindness. If those things bring up a very intense emotional response for you, that means that you need to work on your boundaries. In contrast to that, how do you know if you need to work on respecting other people's boundaries? They're often tied together. So if you have issues with one, it's likely that you may have issues with the other side of the coin as well. Again, with the blame, you find yourself blaming others or criticizing or giving advice to others unsolicited. You push others into doing things even though they have repeatedly said no. You have a hard time accepting when someone else tells you no. You can also pay attention to body language. If you notice that during the course of a conversation, the person is not maintaining eye contact with you anymore, and you see them physically withdrawing from you, that is a pretty large cue that they are uncomfortable with the scenario and that boundaries are being crossed and they no longer feel safe or comfortable. Now, I want to talk about my experience a little bit because I have struggled with this for a very long time. I have spent a lot of my life in a nurturing role, especially in relationships, which is fine in and of itself. But the issue came in where I didn't know how to draw the line around what was emotionally healthy for me. So I would take on the responsibility of the other person's feelings and emotions in a way that really didn't make sense for my well-being. Either intentionally or unintentionally, I would be manipulated into putting the other person's emotional needs above my own. And for some reason, mine were less important or non-existent. Now, this is a very old habit that's been difficult for me to break. I tend to just go right back into that role because it's a comfortable place for me to be. But it's not healthy, and I am not happy when I'm in that mode because I'm not being true to myself. I'm not feeling confident in myself. I don't have a strong grounding for who I am. So from my perspective, having healthy boundaries is all about you be responsible for your emotional health and I will be responsible for mine. When I am practicing it effectively and I'm feeling really good and grounded and solid and things are not bothering me because I feel confident about being able to draw my lines where I need to, other people's behavior doesn't really affect me in the same way. I don't worry about their reactions or their choices or what if this happens, or a lot of times we cave on our boundaries because we're concerned that there will be negative repercussions. We're concerned the other person will be upset or angry. We're concerned that it will jeopardize the relationship that we're in. Those are all horrible reasons. So how do you decide what your boundaries are then? If you're at a point where you're like, okay, obviously I don't have clear boundaries, but how on earth am I going to define them? Like, where do I even start? How do I know what's appropriate, what's healthy for me? There's actually a list of questions, and I'll post them below this video so that you can look at them. And there's also a blog post with more information that I'll post below the video as well. But these are the questions to ask yourself. What am I willing to accept in this relationship? What am I not willing to accept? What should I be saying no to? What am I saying yes to that I'm not really happy about right now? What am I afraid to speak out about? Are there things in my life that I want to change? What makes me feel miserable? What makes me feel taken advantage of? What makes me resentful? What happened in my past relationships that I wasn't happy about? Was I unhappy because I didn't set strong boundaries, because I didn't know what they were? And what can I change now? These are all really good questions you can ask yourself to help get your mind going and get a better sense of where to start as far as defining the boundaries for you. Okay, now to the actual setting of the boundaries. This part is actually the easiest and the simplest part of this whole video and this whole concept. All you need to do is state your boundary. You don't need to get angry. You don't need to get defensive. You don't need to justify it. You don't need to get into an argument and try to defend it. All you need to do is state it, and that is it. That is all you have to do. If the other person has a reaction, That's off your shoulders. You don't need to be responsible for their reaction, whether it's negative or positive. It's your responsibility to communicate, though. If the person continues to cross your boundary even after you have stated it verbally several times, then it's up to you, but you are not required to continue to engage with that person. You can change the subject or leave, either temporarily or on a long-term basis. That is totally up to you and your discretion. But the point is that all of this can be done calmly and respectfully. You deserve the freedom to express your concerns without fear of repercussion. You deserve to remove yourself from a scenario where you do not feel comfortable. It is totally your right to decide what is okay with you and what is not okay with you. Okay, so how do you even know your boundaries are being crossed? Let's say you've established all of that and you already have your set of boundaries, but you're really fuzzy on when they're actually being crossed and when they're not. If you're feeling fuzzy about that, that means that you just haven't had enough practice. When you communicate a boundary, if the other person is not respecting it, instead of accepting your statement and moving on, they might plead, cajole, push, intimidate, question, argue, attack, criticize, bully, persuade, make insults masked as jokes, and a whole host of other things that will potentially draw it out into a discussion where you feel you need to defend yourself. How do you feel in your gut? That one is often a good indicator for me, because sometimes when I'm confused about how I'm actually feeling because I have conflicting emotions going on, I can tell how I'm really feeling by how I feel in here. If I'm feeling nauseous or sick, then I can guarantee you that my boundaries are being crossed and I'm allowing it, and I'm not comfortable with that. If you find yourself consistently breaking your boundaries even after you've stated them and communicated them clearly because you feel pressured or because you feel afraid of your partner's reaction, that is a red flag and that is not healthy. So if you find yourself in that category, please reconsider. Why is it so hard to maintain personal boundaries? This is because we are not taught as a society how to value ourselves properly. This is also especially hard for people who have grown up in codependent relationships. They tend to put others' needs and feelings first before their own. They're not self-aware enough. They don't feel they have the same rights as others deep down. And they believe that setting boundaries will threaten the relationship. Okay, so now that we've gone through all that, how do you talk about healthy boundaries in a relationship? Just thinking about this for some of you can cause you to feel anxious or feel sick or feel angry even. In a healthy relationship, boundaries are discussed without guilt. There's no blame involved, and neither party feels the need to be defensive. Especially if you are conscious of your language and you use I messages such as I'm feeling such and such. When you talk with your partner, you can explain how the boundary felt like it was crossed for you, and then you can discuss together how to avoid that in the future. If you are in a loving, committed relationship where both parties genuinely want the relationship to work, then this is a key factor in growth in the relationship, because you're building trust with each other, that you will not put each other in situations that will make the other person uncomfortable or having to compromise their personal values. If your partner is unable to do this with you and you just already know that that's not going to work, then focus on maintaining your boundaries with or without the other person's involvement or assistance, whatever that means for you. So in other words, ideally, you will be able to maintain your boundaries regardless of what anyone else is doing, whether it be negative or positive. If they are willing to support and be helpful for you, then all the more power to you, and that's great, and your relationship will grow. But if they're resistant to it and they continually cross your boundaries, then that will make it difficult for intimacy to grow in the relationship, and the trust level will decline. As with any big change, if you're a person who has never really successfully drawn boundaries with others, and you suddenly start doing it, the people around you are going to be a little shocked, and they will probably test you. And they are not going to be comfortable. You're going to feel a little bit of pushback usually, and that's totally normal. As long as you expect it, you should be good to go. Unfortunately, in some cases, this can mean losing an acquaintance or a friend or a relationship. If there is a lack of mutual respect, that's a pretty basic fundamental need for a relationship to thrive. But not to worry, because the relationships that are worth having will survive these types of challenges that arise in the relationship, and they will grow stronger for it. Thank you all for watching this video. I know it was a longer one. I had a lot to say on it because I had been collecting information on it for a while. And also, I am doing my darndest to practice this in my own life and develop a stronger, more grounded sense of self and a stronger sense of my own personal value. Remembering that I have the right to be respected and that I have the right to say no if I want to. And this all stems from the fact that we are each very valuable individuals. And when we forget that is when we allow our boundaries to be crossed, because we are seeking validation and approval from the people in our relationships, people around us. Our own personal validation and approval needs to come from within us in order for us to be grounded in this world, in order for us to feel secure and enjoy life more. Thank you again for watching. Let me know if you have any comments or thoughts on this. I really appreciate you guys, and I will see you all soon. Bye.